Yeah, right.
Well, that's something anyway.
Thanks for your patience.
All right. Anyway, welcome. I'm Aaron Bowman. I think you've heard that a couple times. So my presentation tonight is about Tohoku tsunami. That's a lot of people might know it as in connection with the Fukushima reactor incident. So Fukushima is another prefecture. Fukushima Daiichi is the name of the reactor. And just clearing up some semantics here. And the Tohoku tsunami, an earthquake, is the, you could say, the Great Tohoku or the Great East Japan earthquake, tsunami, what have you. So the Fukushima reactor, that's a little further south. I'll get to that. I'm kind of presenting about the tsunami and a little bit about the one species, how one species adapted, and that's the Brant.
Aaron, would you like a chair instead of your knees?
Right here. Yeah, I'll grab one of these. Why not?
There you go. Yeah, that's better.
There, and I can actually just look at instead of craning my neck. Here we go. So here are some bleak statistics to wrap your head around the scale of the incident and earthquake. It was the largest earthquake in Japan. The highest point of the tsunami, so the highest recorded tsunami wave lift, came to 133 feet, which would put us right about, the water would be lapping about at our feet here.
Wow.
There were well over 19,000 deaths, probably more in the neighborhood of 25,000 by this point. For the tsunami and for the earthquake were also destroyed and were obliterated by the wave. So it was just an unprecedented occurrence. So here's kind of the...
All of the country or just part of it?
So
Moved 8 feet.
the entire country moved 8 feet over.
That's crazy.
All of the islands?
Yeah,
Uniformly?
basic. That I'm not sure about, but that general East Japan location, entire, moved 8 feet over to the east. So we're getting closer all the time. I've always thought, Japan being kind of a halfway ground between where I grew up in Minnesota, or Alaska being a halfway ground between, Minnesota and Japan, both places where I grew up. So now we're close.
1,000 earthquakes in the lead.
Yeah, right. So this is kind of the general, intensity, showing the general intensity of the earthquake. This scale being in the intensity scale, not the Richter scale that we know. So it's a little different range. But to my eye, this is pretty. It's pretty personal. That highest intensity area, that's where I grew up. That's my stomping grounds. So the town that I lived most of my life, my Japanese life in, was recorded the highest jolts. So it was oddly. So kind of basically what's going on. There's the epicenter for the earthquake, and then kind of the scatter of your aftershocks where those occurred after the earthquake. So you have the subduction plate over to the. Let me use my cursor.
Pointer?
Oh, sure. I'll take a pointer. So you have the Pacific plate over here, and then the Okhotsk micro plate coming over the northern. So you have the subduction zone, and then basically what happened was the Okhotsk microplate slid over the subduction zone at that.
Stick that in there. Sorry for the interruption, so we can get my cursor going.
And then, so basically at that Japanese trench, at the Japanese trench zone right in here, the Okhotsk plate slid this way over causing the tsunami and earthquake.
And the 8-foot shift was to the west, you said?
To the east.
Oh, to the east, okay.
Yeah. And
Trying to get closer to Hawaii.
yeah, what actually happened, the subterranean view, there might have been some expanding and contracting there because the subterranean view was between 40 and 80 meters of land movement under there.
Wow.
So that's, they sent some submarine later on, but pretty massive events. Here's a tsunami picture. So that's courtesy of NOAA. That's in centimeters. So one thing to keep in mind is that this is centimeters over deep water. Once you hit shallow water, that totally changes the picture. So if you're on a little tiny atoll, somewhere over here, it might just go right around you as a 3 centimeter. Up against the California coastline, it might pop up as a 5-meter tsunami. So it's just a different. Tsunamis operate very differently depending on the subterranean floor. In the case of Japan, that East Coast area, it gets pretty shallow right up against the coast, and it's a nice long coastline right up against the shoreline, so it just rises up there pretty quick. So a tsunami. So when the water's just when the wave is at its low point, it's moving very fast. As the wave rises up, it moves much more slowly. So you'll have a 30-foot tsunami, and it'll be moving relatively slowly. But what happens is you have multiple fast-moving waves very low, but then they back up into basically the shallow coastline, and then they start falling on top of each other, so they stack up. So that's why you have these massive tsunamis. Here's the Q. It's a drilling rig, a scientific ocean science drilling rig. So they're sending that down. They're drilling what occurred to basically try to drill into that slip zone. They weren't able to quite get to that slip zone, but the conclusion was that one of the big reasons that it slipped so much was not necessarily a lubrication like a clay or a biological matter that they had hypothesized in the past. It was more to do with the heat, but basically this general friction.
The plates.
Yeah, the plates. So you have this massive amount of heat, steam, and that ruptured the sediment in the rock in multiple areas and basically lubricated that heat and that steam intensity, kind of lubricated that slip area. So that was one of their findings of this year from that drill rig. So here's, this summer I took, or not this summer, the summer before this past summer, I took a trip to see the Tsunami Zone, to see the area that I grew up. I hadn't been there for a good 10 years or so, and I wanted to see some friends and some family in the Northern Island as well. So it was a family trip, and at the end I decided I was just gonna go rogue, go on my own. So I took a ferry trip down to the south where I grew up, and I was gonna rent a car and I was gonna hit the area and kind of experience the tsunami area, just like try to get it into my head, like what the place looks like now, because I had no clue. So this is my introduction. I arrived at the ferry terminal, and there's the 7.2 meter marker right there on the wall. That's where the tsunami came to. And as I'm coming in, the sun's rising. I'm getting close to the Miyagi coastline. I'm seeing these odd, like, I'm just looking at them like, what's going on? Why are these? What's this brown smudging going up and down the coastline? And then it dawns on me that that's the height of the tsunami. That's where the tsunami killed back the red pines, because they don't do very well with salt water. So when the salt water comes up, douses the roots, they'll die back. So you see these marks, and I didn't even take any pictures. I just kind of, shut down and keep moving. But anyway, so there's a picture I took from the area. Here's the marker. The red marker is where the tsunami came to. That house was spared, but everything below it was just kind of your basic gravel pads for where homes used to be. And these are new walls, new seawalls that they put in after the quake. A couple new, maybe 3 or 4 new small fishing boats. Here's a massive part of the massive seawall that they've been putting up.
Are those people standing on the edge of it?
It's more of a barricade so cars don't zip along the top.
That would be good.
But there's a lot of staircases carved into it, so there was a lot of talking to my friend there. He said, yeah, there's a lot of corruption going on with Tokyo contractors. So the politicians are trying to cozy up with the Tokyo contractors, and that's basically why a lot of these seawalls went up. So it's kind of difficult to see the ocean from the lowland areas now. Here's the other side. So it's about 20 feet, 25 maybe if you include this. It's a graffiti artist paradise, so if anyone has that tendency, I highly recommend
So
that.
before those seawalls were built, was that beach or estuary or whatever?
Right,
So it's
exactly.
totally
It's,
taken over a big part of the habitat.
And there were
So-
seawalls. There were plenty of seawalls in the area, which were significantly topped, but these would have been topped as well. This would not have done anything. But yeah, it is one of the biggest, in my thinking, one of the biggest ecological catastrophes is going to be these seawalls that they put up.
Wow.
So kind of to give a general overview of where the spots are. That's the maximum. That's where the maximum elevation of the tsunami got to. So that was 133 feet in this town. And the study sites that I'll be talking about are in this area, the north reach and the south extent of it. Reference, this is where the nuclear reactor, the now defunct nuclear reactor sits. To introduce my friend, this is Shimada-san, Tetsuo Shimada is his name. I've been friends with him since I was about 14. He had me do bird counts for his nature center. It's the Miyagi Prefectural Izunuma Uchinuma Foundation that he works for, and he had me do bird counts from middle school up to when I left for college. So he's been a good friend of mine. He's the guy who sat me down to drill statistics and standard deviations. He's like, okay, here you go. Here's the standard deviation. Let's do this tonight. I'm like, oh man. So I continue to work on his abstracts, on his English abstracts that he sends into publications and the like. So, information I'm going to present here about the Brant in this region. So the Brant, the population of Brant in Asia, in East Asia, is pretty small compared to the North American population. North America, the West Coast, it's about 150,000, I believe, wintering Brant. The wintering population in Asia is 10,000, and in Japan it's about 2,500 between the three main wintering locations. The three main wintering locations are here, Hakodate Bay, Mutsu Bay, and then the Sanriku Coast, this general kind of serrated or fjord-like area. This is the Notsuke Hanto, Notsuke Peninsula, and that's their main stopover site coming in from kind of big islands from the Chukotka Peninsula and Lena River Delta area.
Which river delta was that?
Lena River.
Lena,
Yeah. So the Brant Habitat Use Study #1. This is his title and the group of folks that he had working with him on it, and this is kind of just going through a quick method and synopsis of what they found. So there are three counts. This is the year following, the winter following the earthquake. So the earthquake happened in March. Most of the geese had basically started leaving already by that point. And then they started doing their counts in November 2011. So, half a year, a little over half a year had elapsed. So they did 3 counts. Their durations took about 2 to 3 days. Recovery and reconstruction operations, so it took quite a while to travel the 110 kilometers in distance. The locations, they're pinpointed by GPS. The habitat types are divided into 4 main types: fishery harbors, open water, sandy beach, and river mouth areas. And the chi-square test was what was used to kind of sort out if there was significant deviation from the null hypothesis. So the study area is as I pointed out before, the south being the Kitakami-gawa, Kitakami estuary, and then the north being the Rikuzen-kita Bay. So the pre-tsunami foraging sites were primarily actually wakame seaweed farms, aquaculture farms. So they would forage on the lines between the buoys, and they would actually forage on those lines, and also on the oyster farms, on the seaweed that would grow on the oyster farm aquaculture setups. And they also foraged on the reef shore areas as well. The resting sites were the river mouths, the small estuaries that came out, and the sandy beaches along the shoreline. So here's kind of that was pre-tsunami. Here's your post-tsunami view. So these are these kind of flat areas. This used to be a city. It kind of, if you haven't seen that city, it's a little, you might not really know what you're looking at, but Sanriku City, or it was. And here's kind of the other side as you go up to the hills. Then you have the houses that it didn't quite reach, up here. So it's a very drastic line. You'll have one area, you'll just have nothing, and then all of a sudden there's a house that didn't get touched. It's a very arbitrary line, it seems. The train lines were severed. All of the high, as shown there. So post-tsunami foraging habitat preferences. There was a pretty significant change. Before the earthquake, you would not see Brant geese or Brants in a harbor area or near a boat lift. After the tsunami, my friend, Shimano-san, we talked about this. He emailed a number of times, said they're all over the harbors. They're in the boat lift yards. There's walking around in there. It's weird. He's like, what's going on? So what was going on is basically all the wakame farms and the oyster farms and all of the natural eelgrass and seaweed reefs were churned up and were totally demolished. What happened to the wharfs and the boat lift yards and the harbors is they subsided and turned into a new food resource where seaweed was growing. So here's a goose feeding on that seaweed on the wharfs. So that was a pretty dramatic change. Here are geese. You can see some geese feeding on the aquaculture farming facilities set up here.
What used to be, or what was still going on?
This was reconstructed very quickly in 2013. By 2013, the winter of 2013, 85% had been reconstructed of the aquaculture setups. And that kind of gives an idea of what happened here. You have a very adaptable species, it seems. You have late November, early January. They're still in the harbors, and then they're going out to sea. They're hitting the aquaculture setups that have started to grow seaweed.
So the aquaculture, seaweed aquaculture is not in the near shore, it's out farther.
It's close. It's reasonably close to shore, but it's in deep water.
Outside of the harbors
Yeah.
and the estuaries.
Yeah, outside of the boat harbors and the estuary areas. So there was a pretty quick changeover to their preferred back to their preferred feeding sites. But there were some other things going on too that he found out a couple of years later when he did some satellite tracking of them. So he did here's the capture team. This guy, he's the main trapper. He's amazing. The traps he sets up, the flat traps that he just very simple. But on the beach, they caught him on the beach. So near an estuary, and it's a very simple trap system. It's just basically kind of like a mist net with a couple bamboo rods and a line running through it, and line runs over a couple hundred meters, and guy yanks it. And, you can catch. With him, I think I've caught with him and our group, we've caught probably over 100 pintails in one. Mayhem. You don't want to do that. Covered with bird and scratches, and you're just, which one do we want to put the satellite tracker on? Well, yeah, great team of people to put satellite trackers on. So they also, so their goal was to figure out, to help to outline kind of where the geese, how the geese were migrating to their northern breeding territories, to the nesting spots. So one bird ended up getting that far, of their four.
How many birds were sitting with tracking?
Four of them,
Just
yeah.
four.
So they seem to take a fairly direct route after they lift off from the Hokkaido area and these adjoining islands. But the information they weren't quite expecting was that it showed that 37% were of the gathered points of the pings basically were in terrestrial or non-coastal habitats, and that was completely unheard of. So they thought maybe it was just faulty data, or the satellite trackers were faulty. But then some people got out there and they started observing them in rice fields, and the geese were still not back on their normal feed necessarily. They were, utilizing tsunami-swept rice field habitat, which was essentially unheard of up till that point.
So when you say tsunami-swept rice fields, so was rice still growing in them?
So at that point, so that would have been March that the tsunami happened. So they would just be foraging on any fallen grain because that they planted. So they were just foraging on.
But it was still active rice agriculture going on. It wasn't like a field that had been inundated with salt and then was being reclaimed by natural.
Well, it was at that point. It was, yeah. It was they're just destroyed fields basically that were waiting restoration. But if it came, so that was kind of the brand. They were probably. I would imagine they would have been going after rice shoots that would have been coming in from fallen grain. So they had this intriguing data point, and then by 2000, so the next year, 2015, 82% of the agricultural fields were restored, ushering in a lot of people, a lot of disturbance, and the geese all left. So it's an interesting, the geese start using the demolished harbors, and that's the subsided harbors, and then the harbors start being restored, so they leave. They're utilizing the rice fields. They start getting restored, so they leave. So they're kind of being pushed around a little bit, but hopefully by that point, some of the habitat has had time to develop wild forage again. So local, after 2014, the local observers noted less usage of the terrestrial areas from that point on. So there you have the whirlwind goose talk.
Were they able to keep an eye through these years and the change between the different population was doing? Was it staying pretty much the same with what birds they had?
Yes, it was. Did I not include that bar chart? No, I guess I had it right there and I decided not to put it. Well, that would have answered the question very much more in a nice way, but yeah, it did remain fairly constant, with some variation, but not necessarily in a downward trend. Yeah. So it seemed, talking to him, he seemed to think that it's really kind of it's a story of a very opportunistic species, a very adaptable species, and in many ways the geese fared a lot better than the humans in that regard. But it's a little bit hard to say, like long term, how is that going to affect? They're doing well so far.
So where are the birds breeding?
So north from the Lena River Delta in the Arctic Ocean, Russian Arctic, and also I I think most of the Alaskan nesting populations go to the west coast, but there may be some crossover.
So both the Asian population of Black Brant and the Alaska Black Brant are breeding in the same areas?
The same areas. Yep. And I don't think there's necessarily. I believe that it's the same stock. Or the same genetics, the same general genetics, but that I don't think has really been delved into very much.
Aaron, when you were putting this together, I noticed you had some slides of eelgrass, Brant feeding on eelgrass.
Oh, right.
And then windrow eelgrass washed up on shore, they'd be plucking through there.
Right.
So the birds that are in Alaska go to Cold Bay, Eisenbeck Lagoon, which has 50,000 tons of eelgrass. And they're there from roughly mid-September until, November 7th. In past years, it might have been pushed back since then.
And they'd go down to Mexico, or?
Well, yeah, they'd go down to Southern California and down the bottom,
Take a
San
pretty
Quintin
direct-
Bay in particular.
Direct
sometimes
route right across the Gulf.
Right, yeah, so it's a, pretty quick flight. And they're really fat when they're on Eisenbeck in the fall. I've only been out there like the last week of October, but they've got half an inch of fat on their breast. And sometimes when they're shot into the ground, they'll actually split open and you see all this fat. And inside, in the cage ground, pretty heavily loaded. So they lose almost half their weight from Eisenbeck on that flight, which is at least 36 hours straight through.
Yeah.
But on the Yukon Delta also, during the molt and in the fall, before they get to Eisenbeck, they'll feed on saltgrass, which is, it's like a mowing lawn. It's 3 inches tall or less, and they'll just graze that down to half an inch tall. So I could see where they'd come into these agricultural fields if there was this short grass coming up.
Yeah.
In the spring especially.
And interestingly, there are a lot of Brant and terrestrial habitat, using terrestrial habitats in Europe. That's pretty standard. But up till this point in Japan, it's been unheard of.
Maybe because of too much human activity.
That's possible too. Yeah, too tight spaces, essentially. Yeah.
So are they eating algae or just vascular plants that are growing in the water?
Wakame, a type of kelp.
Okay, it is kelp. Okay.
Yep, it is a type of kelp, and also other species as well. But I think primarily it's the Wakame farms that they're on. But there could be a lot of other on the rigging.
But they don't eat the fucus and things like that grow in the intertidal?
The coarse stuff, not usually.
Not usually.
Eelgrass.
They're picky about which
Eelgrass
algae they
and-
eat.
Yeah, and then sea lettuce too.
Yeah.
Green algae,
Yeah.
green algae.
That's probably what's growing a lot in these areas. I'm guessing is a lot of.
Since on these Wakame sea agricultural farms?
Not really. I don't think their population is big enough for they're really noticed enough. And I think the Wakame tends to extend further down where the geese aren't really foraging. Obviously, they don't dive.
Yeah, they feed like dabblers, basically.
Yeah, just like a bunch of widgeons out there. Yeah. And I had to include in the last slide this beautiful guy. So this bird has a story. I just have to. It might get me a little emotional, but this guy. So it's a pied avocet. I'm about done with my little tour, my little road trip for the day. I'm headed down south to get on the ferry again. And I'm like, okay, I just need to go one more spot. I'm just trying to find a spot that I can say, I understand where I am. You know, I'm trying to find it. I know that area really well. I've birdwatched the area a lot, bike, you know, taking my bike around there a lot. So I went up to the area and I was like, okay, I think I know where I am. There's the river mouth, you know, and all the trees are dead, but that's okay, you know. So I climb up and over the new seawall that wasn't there. Yeah, I climb up and over this colossal thing, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, oh wait, what's that bird? And I think it's a little gull at first, and then you know, from a distance, and it's when I was a kid, and I never saw one of these. And so this was a lifer for me, and I could approach it like from view to view. It was just amazing. I was basically shaking. I was like, this is too amazing. You know?
And you got the pictures taken.
It was almost, you know, I was just walking the beach, just like kicking debris. You know, there's like pieces of tsunami destroyed boats and stuff. Just looking around, like, I don't know. I just felt eerie, nasty feeling, and I just, you know, was about ready to leave, and I just like, I hate this. And then this bird shows up. So it was a very nice way to end the trip. And you know, it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless. But it was after this trip that I was finally able to on YouTube and see the videos that people have posted about watching the tsunami come in. So I've needed to watch that, you know, just to see like, I don't know, a type of weird therapy, I guess, to figure out what happened to these places. Because if I go on Google, you know, Google Maps, or if I go on, yeah, those satellite imagery resources, it's gone. You know, those places, bizarre feeling, I guess. But,
So nothing's getting, like the houses that were wiped out, they're not getting rebuilt?
no, there's certain zonings now that can be rebuilt, and certain zonings that cannot be towards the coast. So there's a certain distance from the shoreline, I think, that they're not permitting rebuilding of residential property.
So like,
Commercial property is going up.
you know, like here we know that there's typically a big earthquake, what, every 600 years or something, that the stuff sinks down. Do they have sort of a feel for how often things happen at this scale, or?
So there was a fairly large tsunami, a couple of meters shorter at the very height, that happened 1860s, so relatively recently.
Yeah.
And that killed eerily almost the same number of people, 22,000, in this case 20-some. But the thing that's going on there is you have I don't know how to, it's almost like a European model, where the people from those areas were from those areas. You know, their ancestors were from those areas. So all of these communities are now basically in diaspora. They're gone, and they won't ever come back. You know, so it's a surreal, kind of eerie feeling in that area, because those areas were the homeland to a certain group of people. And yeah, it's gone. Yeah, the hospitals are gone, and the educational setups are gone. The schools were largely the evacuation sites, so a lot of people fled to the schools because they're concrete, rebar concrete structures. Many of those, well, you know, in some areas it was half and half. Some got submerged, some took all the people with them, and some at the very top who could cling to the antenna survived. You know, so you had a whole range of stories. But,
It's a lot of people, 19.
yeah, so I mean, there's the city of Kesennuma in the north of Miyagi Prefecture. That's about a 60,000. A city of about 60,000. That city was nearly obliterated, and you know, the imagery, the videography I've seen of that is the most apocalyptic I've seen of this. I was looking at trying to figure that area out, because the first thing I remembered after hearing that the tsunami struck, I turned on the TV, somebody's house, and they're showing footage of Kesennuma, and I was looking at it, and I couldn't make out what was going on, because it was just water and then fire on top of the water. I couldn't understand what was happening, because I knew what Kesennuma looked like, but I couldn't see it. So then watching I understand the process, I understand what's going on, for better or worse. But,
Are there any other questions, or?
I was curious, what's the update at the nuclear reactor? What's happening there now, today?
more water's leaking, more water's flowing out to sea in the subterranean, water. There's multiple. I can't remember how many tanks. Oh, there it goes. I can't remember how many tanks are being built. But if you go on Google Maps or something, you can zoom in there and see the tank farms that are going up. So they're continually storing water, reactor water, and it doesn't have any good closure to it. So they're still developing technologies. Try this, try that. Let's make this a little bit, more durable. See if we can get in there a little better. See if we can do a little more before it fizzles out. It's an ongoing process, but it won't be solved in my lifetime.
So I forgot to mention on our bird count earlier, a couple of weeks ago, do you remember when that was, Nick? We had a really big windstorm, and I spotted a flock of about 35 Black Brant by the weir on Yak Lake.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
How many?
It's about 35 birds. Yeah. Wait a minute. And then when I dropped them off and I came back, I pulled off and looked, and it was like, those are Black Brant.
When was it?
When was that, Nick? About 3 weeks
It
ago?
was a day just like this, just
Okay.
sideways.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
yeah.
So pretty recently.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's very cool.
It's really unusual to see Black Brant on the lake.
Yeah.
They're out in the water this time of year, out in the salt.
Maybe out where
Montague.
Pete's
Yeah,
at,
it
he sees them
depends also
going.
on the fall, we'll see in
Yeah.
the spring for sure.
But yeah, these storms come, so get out there.
How can you count the birds? Too many. Do you have any machine that?
Yeah, you can use a counter. What I like to do for counting a big group of birds, like shorebirds, is you get an idea of start with 10, what 10 looks like, what 10 looks like, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, okay, that's 100. Then you figure out what 100 looks like, then you figure out what 1,000 looks like by extrapolating those. So I have a really hard time, I'm a really slow reader, I'm a pretty fast counter, I'm very circular. I don't know which came first, because I counted at a very early age, I was counting in middle school, and my eyes were going like this all the time, so I don't know if that influenced my slow reading, because you're drawing circles in the air with your eyes. Right?
It takes some practice, but you can get pretty accurate at it.
Actually, the birds, they're
Yeah.
together, they're not separate.
Yeah, and then they're,
together.
and then it's
So how can you
three-dimensional
count
too,
those?
so.
You estimate, yeah.
You estimate, yes,
Oh,
there's
yeah?
no perfect, it's not.
If you're lucky enough to go birding, it looks something like this. His eyes kind of roll up to the top of his eye, and he goes, how many is it, Aaron? Looks like 4,276.
I leave off
And of
the
course, you
last
have to
little bit.
agree with them because, you know, how are you gonna contradict that? Unless you can take a picture of it. you know.
It's an estimation. It's all an estimation. And the nicest feeling is if you have another experienced counter working right next to you, and you're both counting, and then you're like, you match up, and then you're like,
I don't know, it's just together. I thought, I was thinking, when they have lots of birds together, they have like a machine, you just goes like this and then,
No.
well, people
No,
are
people
taking
video,
photos.
yeah, but
You
it's
know,
hard,
like
yeah.
digital photography is really good for bird counting, you know, checking, you know, you can just, and then you can get a better idea. But even with that, there's a lot of, it's depth. So the flock's not just 2D, it's 3-dimensional, so it's
missing you count like that. I cannot, too many, no, just one spot,
practice.
too many.
It's all practice.
His nickname is Awesome Aaron.
That's all I know.
I also want to
There are good
mention,
counters in here, it's not just, you know.
I also want to mention that we are still seeing Anna's hummingbirds in the area. I banded an immature male a couple weeks ago and a mature male at the beginning of October. So if you are seeing hummingbirds, winter hummingbirds around, please let me know. If you get a picture, that would be terrific. But I am documenting, keep me in mind if you see something.
Okay, well, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.